Welcome to Mad Men, where we gather in the Creative Lounge to discuss and analyze each episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which aired between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of the show. One of us went through it just once back when it was airing. And then there's me, who dabbles in writing, painting, and a little podcast hosting. I'm John Agroni, and Will Ashton, why do you look so glum? Your new book, Ashes to Ashton, just came in the mail.
Man, yeah, I was gonna text that to the group chat. I was like, John, have you read Sterling's Gold? Hoping that you would say yes, and that there is some sort of tie-in. You know how like sometimes, like when a show's popular, they have tie-in books. Like I remember when How I Met Your Mother was on, like whatever Barney's Playbook was like a thing. I was hoping they had published Sterling's Gold. Like I think they did that recently with the new Ant-Man movie, right? Like they actually published the Paul Rudd's book.
Are you referring to Da Vinci Code, where they like published the Bible?
No, yes. It's just for Da Vinci Code. Yeah, they reissued the Bible, just being like, this might be popular now. People might want to read this.
Yeah, people are interested in the Gnostics, right?
Yeah,
okay, but we already heard his voice, and we can't forget about Mike Overholes, who kind of seems to be giving it off right now. Mike, why was that delivery person in your office for so long?
It throws me off when you use my real last name. I just don't think it happens very often. Mostly when I'm in trouble. Did I do something to you, John?
I love how I mentioned a delivery person, and like literally it sounds like there's a delivery truck right outside.
There is. It's
I don't
Amazon
know if the
right
listeners
there.
will even hear it, but yeah, that's kind of scary. Okay, so this week we're talking about Chinese Wall. So this is season 4, episode 11. So we're almost at the end of season 4. This episode was directed by Phil Abraham. It was written by Erin Levy. Only Erin Levy. And she is the first, I believe, I hope someone can fact check me on this, but she is the first writer besides Matthew Weiner to write more than one episode solo. And of course, we've talked about her a bunch. She was on the commentaries. And this is quite an episode. It came out October 3rd, 2010. And this is kind of the continuation of a lot of the stuff that started up in Hands and Knees. It focuses around really just SCDP finding out about a few weeks after Roger did that they're losing Lucky Strike. This has been set up all season, that without Lucky Strike, the firm is in serious danger. Now, Will, I know we were originally supposed to record this a bit ago, and so normally I would ask you what you thought of the episode. It sounds like you need a minute to refresh yourself since we went a little bit before you were able to rewatch, right?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a few days since I've watched it, but I think I do remember it pretty well. I was rereading the chapter in Mad Men Carousel. I was also reading Noel Murphy's piece for the AV Club back in 2010.
Great piece.
Yeah, both very illuminating. Yeah, I mean, I think, we've been talking about a lot, I think, especially this season, how the show dives into the idea of, there's always a desire to separate the work and home life. And this season has really been head on and being like, is that even a possibility for these assorted people, at least, especially because, even the title is, I think, a reference to something Faye said like a couple
Faye said
back.
A few episodes ago. Yeah. Because Don was essentially trying to ask her to help him out, right, in terms of sending clients their way. And she mentions like, well, I can't do that. Like, she mentions the concept of a Chinese wall and how that works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, we're really seeing all the walls kind of collide, and the idea of like one's work life being intrinsically central to someone's personal life as well, with the exception, thankfully, of Peggy, who seems to be just kind of living her life to the best and getting stooped by a nice guy with very short shorts that, I'm happy for her at least, but everyone else seems very tense and miserable, especially Roger and Dawn. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really good episode that I think also just kind of not only continues a lot of the central themes of the season, but really seems to be tackling them in thematically heavy, but ultimately very compelling and tense ways.
Mike, I couldn't help but notice when Abe was mentioned, you were shaking your head in a very upset manner. You have a problem with Abe? Peggy doesn't.
I do not like Abe. I did not like Abe the first time I watched this show, and when you watch it and he's, that creep at the party, you're like, fine, whatever. It's not getting in the way of Peggy's lesbian experience. And then when he shows up in the beginning of this episode in the back of that car, I knew he was trouble when he walked in.
You were like Joyce in the front seat where you're like, okay, the heteros are at it again.
I mean,
I'm a little big. Can you guys calm down?
I think you could just, tell romance was in the air, though, when they were sitting, or he was rather making her sit on his lap. And it seems like his Lincoln log was an alert, and,
She took the message. She was feeling something between them, and she carried it to fruition, I guess you could say.
And she was wet because she went swimming.
Nice one. So you mentioned the Chinese wall thing, Will, and yeah, that's an established business term, as we kind of, I think we talked about it a few episodes ago, yeah. And the idea is that when you have like a personal relationship, there needs to be like a separation, a barrier, within relationships between people that could lead to conflicts of interest, right? And that speaks, of course, to the general theme of this episode, which is the conflict between people's personal and professional lives. So this episode revolves a lot around this huge crisis that's happening in their business lives. Don and everybody at the firm, Roger, Bert, and all of them feeling like what's going to happen to our jobs. For Don, it's about his legacy, it's about his credibility, and he's mixing his personal life into it and sometimes rejecting the personal lives of other people. So he's kind of given Pete the business, as it were, in terms of like, you're distracted. And Pete just had a baby. They literally go to a funeral and are using it to essentially try to pick up some clients. I mean, it's so on the nose, but I do think the episode still works being so on the nose in that way, because it's just hammering in over and over again that Don's got a real issue here. And then it comes down to him sleeping with his secretary, which is the ultimate, bringing in the personal and the business and mixing them together. The walls are coming down for Mr. Don.
Yeah. And I was curious, John, if you potentially could relate, I know things for you have been busy at work, in that, you've had to devote a lot of time to work. I'm sure it's been a hectic, very busy summer, but I'm sure in your home life, you're like, I want to, focus on my other things. Maybe I want to settle down, raise a family. And then in your other personal life, you're, not online as much, and you're sending all these outdated memes like Hawk 2 Girl stuff. And you're just like, hey, I've been busy, but Will. I found these memes from Hawk 2 Girl. And you're
reaching out to you, trying to make you laugh, trying to put a smile on your face. And obviously failing because your expectations, are too high. And I'm never going to learn that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
do you do this often? Do you out John as being an outdated memer? Like, is this the first time this has come up? This is some dirty work.
I think it tickles him. I think it brings Will some like pleasant joy to be like, this is John's foible, and I'm happy for it.
Here's the thing: John is an outdated memer, but it's because he has morals. It's because unlike all of us who stayed on Twitter, John was like, "Nah, I'm out of here." So of course he's gonna be better. Sorry, he's better than him.
I like to think that he just sees way more memes than us, and that he has to go through like one by one and really see like the muck of the muck. And like he just eventually finds the gold nuggets, and then it just takes a while because we just see those on Twitter pretty instantly. But he's just like, you don't know the shit I've seen. And
that's
like,
almost true. Yeah. But then I do still send you the muck. I can't help it. I can't resist. Yeah, I'm sorry to say. So let's go through the episode. And we talked about the Peggy stuff a little bit already. And this whole thing with Lucky Strike, it really does kick off with Ken Cosgrove. Ken is at dinner with his fiance. We meet Cynthia. She's played by, oh gosh, I'll look up the actress's name. I forget. She was in 10 Things I Hate About You. She plays Bianca in that. Larissa Olenek. I can never quite remember her name. She was also in The Secret Life of Alex Mack. I don't know if either of you even know what that is.
We're talking about Ken Cosgrove's dinner date, right? Is that what we're referring to?
His fiance dinner date.
Come on,
Will Ashton.
The irony.
Have some respect for Ken. God,
sure.
If it was Harry Crane, he'd be like, "Oh yes, his partner, his devoted wife, yeah,
his wife,
the most important person, the luckiest one."
Right, yeah. I don't know why I'm Trump in this scenario, according to Mike, but whatever. I was just going to say that his fiance, at least actor-wise, is probably the least notable person, because across the table is Ray Wise. I was so excited to see him, and I was so disappointed they wasn't in it more.
Yeah, it's kind of a blink and you miss it little cameo there. Very fun. But yeah, we do kind of see, Ken continues to be sort of like one of the more normal characters in the show. Like Cynthia just seems like a normal, chill person. And this is how they find out, because somebody runs into Ken from BBDO and doesn't realize that Ken is unaware, because of course Roger hasn't told anybody about Lucky Strike consolidating with BBDO. And so this guy tells him what's going on, and that's how we jump into Ken having to essentially go to Pete and be like, all right, well, here's what happened. And Pete's literally about to have a baby, yeah. Will Ashton.
Yeah. And I was going to say, that was, I believe, Tommy Dewey, right? From Casual that we see there.
I don't remember. It's been a while.
Oh, you don't remember
Casual.
now.
That was like a decade ago. Will Ashton, come on now.
Oh, no, I'm the one that doesn't remember things. But I point out the actor and the character in the show, and you're like, I don't know. I'm
side
go back.
Character. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, he does look kind of different, doesn't he? In this, a little bit, pretty clean shaven. But yeah, so the news kind of comes. Everybody gathers, and Roger has this little fake phone call, which I love. This might be my favorite part of the whole episode. It's like Roger's acting, but also like how good is John Slattery at acting in this? I mean, being able to kind of like, that's a very complicated, nuanced performance, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that while watching. Like, yeah, how is it like a fun assignment for an actor to then have to do do the classic one-way phone call, but in a worse way? You know what I mean? Is it a stretch for them, or is it just like a warm-up exercise that's so fun to do that it's easy? I feel like it could go either way.
What I was curious about with that scene is, like, I don't doubt that everyone else in the room buys it, but is Don actually believing that he's doing it, or is he kind of aware that
he believes it? Yeah.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
I don't think he's questioning it. Okay. I think they're so distracted by the situation that they're not suspicious. Like, they're not really, their brains aren't on. They're full emotion of like, is this going to work?
I just ask because, like, not only does Don know Roger pretty intrinsically at this point, but he's just quick to point fingers and, like, be like, Pete, if you weren't busy having a baby, this would have hadn't happened and all this stuff. So I just didn't know if he was kind of aware of what was going on, but didn't want to say anything because the situation was so fraught. I think this had happened
later. I think the shock at the event, he has not processed it. And to them, they're not sure. They even mentioned this in the commentary. Weiner's like, they're not sure they really lost this account, right? There's like a desperation to it. It's not till later in the episode when they've had time for this news to sink in that Don does what you're saying, where he lays into Pete, he lays into Roger, like he just starts to lash out in general.
Also,
but I do like how they handle it. Mm-hmm.
If Don is pointing fingers, I think the first one he would point is incompetence, not you're a liar. And they also definitely wouldn't have been sending him in person, quote unquote, if they didn't believe him.
Right. And Don has too much hubris to be like, well, it was creative's fault. That's never even going to occur to him. Right. And I think we would agree it's not really creative. It does kind of come down to, it was Roger. I feel like the whole thing with Roger was as Joan points out, he should have revealed this way sooner. Like, he shouldn't have sat on it, but also he shouldn't have been sitting this entire time. Like, he should have been creating these contingency plans and been a real account person like Pete and bringing in clients to make up for Lucky Strike. Like, that's how you do this job. But that is, I think, the major flaw to Roger is that he inherited the account. He inherited his wealth. He is like the inverse of Don. They're obviously best friends, but when you really look at how different they are, there is that lack of respect between them of how they see each other. For Roger, it's a huge insecurity because he did not work for what he has. And it's sad because he is good at certain things. Like, he is like he's a schmoozer. He's a people person. He could do it. But I think that he's so afraid of failing that he just didn't even try. And like, this book is like the last thing he's left with. It's a tragic thing for a fan favorite character.
Yeah, I mean, not to pull a John and reference an outdated internet joke, but he literally had one job. And, he like just completely shat the bed. I mean, it's sad, like it's hard to see a guy that we just can't help but love despite his follies and stuff fall. But, it's not like he was blindsided by this. He had 30 days, supposedly, or at least some time, like a window to prepare.
It says Jonah was weeks ago, so it was probably like 2-3 weeks.
Right. He had some time to at least put some sort of, action plan together to figure this out. And he just didn't do that. This whole situation was made even worse because they were blindsided and didn't get the notice or anything.
One last thing about the phone thing, I love how imperfect it is because clearly he's speaking too quickly, or responding too quickly for Lee Gardner. Like it's not plausible. But what's cool about this, I think, is that later on in the episode, you have a conversation where Don is on the phone with Leo from Glowcoat. And it's really sad. I mean, it's just a bummer of a conversation. But as it happens, a little bit of trivia, apparently they originally shot that as a one-way call. So you weren't originally going to hear the conversation on the other end of the phone. You were just it was going to be kind of a similar thing. I think the idea there too was that you just hear Don talking and you can kind of tell what's going on without hearing the other voice. And it kind of mirrors the phone call from Roger, but also it sounds more plausible because there are more gaps and everything like that. But Erin Levy was talking about this and she's like, well, we did that after the fact. They had already shot when John Hamm is doing that whole thing where he's talking to Leo. They shot it and then they had to write the conversation afterward. And she said that was actually really hard because you of course have to like write it in a way and then they have to get somebody to perform it. They actually had somebody from within the show who was technically SGA, but like was not like really an actor. And they had him kind of like do these lines and he had to do them a little quick because they didn't perfectly time it. But it still works. I think it's pretty seamless. Like I wouldn't have been suspicious from my own way.
Yeah, I had no idea. That's really cool.
Trivia. What are you going to do? So the whole agency finds out what's going on. I love this reference. The commentaries bring this up where if you remember when Paul is talking to Peggy in the first season, he's like, if you ever see Burt Cooper, go to the accountant or go down to where the accountants are, run for the hills. And who shows up in the meeting to tell everybody? It's the account guy. The accountant is there. So that's a fun thing that Weiner was able to sort of bring back because, yeah, that's a whole thing. So the episode, you're really following kind of this really like doom and gloom kind of energy, but it's also kind of interesting because there's also a little bit of like an excitement. There's like a refresh of the energy to the office. So what did you make of that? Like, how did you interpret the way that they're, depicting what it's like? Because I know, Mike, you've been in some difficult like startup cultures. I know you've mentioned this. Have you ever been in a situation kind of similar to this where like you get like super bad news and the air changes?
I haven't personally, not to to my own home, but every place I've worked in has been pretty successful. No,
right.
But it made me think.
Slack,
I have a friend,
Uber.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever heard of Enron?
Facebook. Yeah.
Well, I was there when it was the Facebook. I left.
Right.
No, so I have a buddy who like literally in this last week, he's at a smaller company and they found out that their largest customer is churning. It's like this exact situation. It like accounts for 25% of their annual revenue. And yeah, like, so watching it from the outside, this was an interesting time to watch this episode because it's like the exact situation. And it's like, it's so sad. It's still the same thing. It's like everybody is worried that like they're going to lose their job or like there's at least going to be like downsizing. If there is, what departments would it be? Like, where is their excess? Like, then also, why did it go wrong? What could they have done differently? Was it anybody's fault? Was it nobody's fault? Is that just business? It's not a fun time.
Not fun at all because everybody's desperate. Everybody's trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? I've been in agencies where not quite this dire kind of a situation, but there have been things, like people getting laid off, right? And everyone's like, are we going to get laid off? Like, what's going to happen? And so, yeah, it can be kind of like a scary thing, but it can also sort of be like, like sometimes there's like opportunity too. And it's kind of mixed in there as well. So
true.
Don tells Faye what's going on. And we get the whole thing with him and Faye, and he kind of has the gall, really, to ask her to basically like put her ethics to the side. And I hate what Don does here. I mean, I get like, his identity is so wrapped up into this firm, and he uses it, as a weapon against Faye to be like, it's, your job isn't as important because you just work for them. You didn't build that. For him, his name is wrapped up in this. And I think that this is where you really see that lack of respect for Faye, even before he cheats on her. And I really struggle with this because I think that the show is trying to tell us something very clear about how ultimately to Don, his professional life is more important than his personal life. It's what ruined his first marriage, right? But I'm still kind of like, is it more complicated than that? Am I being a little bit too simplistic with reading what this episode is saying,
Well, I don't think it's too simplistic. I mean, I think it's apparent that even though Don is clearly caught off guard and he says at one point, like, this is the one thing I never wanted to happen to the company. And like, I never even wanted to entertain this thought of this happening. Like, he's the only one that seems even slightly prepared for like having to reorganize his life in this way. Like, he's the only one that's been in a scenario where he's have to like, figure out on the fly what's going to happen. And I think even though he's lashing out and like losing his cool and yelling at people and breaking his trophies and all that, like, I think he's also the one who kind of after a while can figure out like, okay, this is what I need to do. And if it comes at the cost of the people I've developed relationships with, it's for the better good. And that's heartbreaking and sad. And it kind of shows that he's basically choosing to be kind of a shell of himself. But at the same time, he seems to be the only one that has any real idea how to move the company forward. And everyone else is just kind of either caught up in their own personal lives or just not really able to work around this sort of unenviable position. And so I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 2 episodes, but I feel like they might be able to get on their feet because of Dawn, but that's probably going to mean that Faye is going to get out of the picture.
We'll see.
I don't appreciate you saying that Dawn is the only one who can see them through. I do think Pete Campbell is good at his job. And Pete Campbell has gone and found accounts where there haven't been accounts in the past. And
I guess I mean, though, is like, I think obviously Peggy and Pete are on it, but they're both, like I said before, like Peggy's in this like new relationship and Pete just had his first baby. Like, I think it's not that they're uncommitted. I just think they're both distracted in a way that Don really doesn't have anything else tethering to his personal life, so he can focus for better or for worse on this right now. Yeah.
How can you call Pete distracted? He's there. His baby is being born and he's in the office. He's not distracted. He has his priority. That's like actually kind of the whole point of Pete in this episode.
Sure, I get what you're saying. But I also think he is going, if he's not distracted now, he's probably going to be distracted moving forward. But I get what you're saying.
You're discrediting him for a hypothetical of something you haven't seen happen yet. He's not just like Don.
I mean, I don't know. It seems like John's at least a little bit in my corner on this one, though.
I mean, yeah, I think that's the point in a way that they are not like, it's clear to me that Peggy and Pete are not like, they have their personal lives in a special place that doesn't touch this stuff. Like, I think that's clear. And in a way that Don is like, Don has everything wrapped up into this because he has nothing else. And I think that's the point. I guess. So yeah, even though I think Pete is, he's stepping up, he's doing his best. Like, it's not like, it's different. It's not like he doesn't have any kind of care in the world for the business. It's that he has this exciting thing going on. And I do think it's ironic too, by the way, that he wasn't there for the birth of either of his children. Yeah. He wasn't there for Peggy's. He wasn't there for Trudy's. We don't even see Trudy. But the funny thing about that is they originally did shoot a bunch of stuff with Trudy and with the baby and stuff like that. The episode, I think, originally was going to end not like right where Pete has the birth, but like that was going to be one of the last few shots was him meeting his his child. But they ended up cutting that out, I think, for not just time, but also to kind of drive home that message of, this stuff is taking something away from Pete, I think is what the episode is trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, and I was just going to say real quick that I think even though, Pete's obviously not in an ideal position and Peggy's kind of got her heads in a cloud, I think they both have a much healthier relationship outside of work than
work-life balance.
Yeah, exactly.
What if
Peggy has like friends?
they cut to Pete meeting his daughter. He takes a picture. Picture comes out. I don't know if Polaroids exist yet. I can't remember. He looks at it. What's the picture of? How do we see his daughter? It's the Gerber baby.
That would be pretty funny. Hey, I mean, well, it looks like Sterling Cooper Draper Pryce might have a shot at a new client, possibly thanks to Faye. Not to skip all the way to the end here, but Heinz. It's just vinegar, sauces, and beans. Well, Ashton, not ketchup. But, Heinz baked beans. That's something I've eaten before.
Still, Heinz is the pride and joy, or at least I should say, one of the pride and joys of Pittsburgh. So I was very excited to hear that not only is Mountain Dew seemingly still on their side, but Heinz is coming in their corner. So it's becoming a real good time for me.
Did Ken bring Mountain Dew over from when he joined the agency? I don't remember if that was confirmed.
He did, but I say that because they have the board and the board room, as it were, and it says like they have like the 4 divisions and like the one that says like most secure. Near the bottom, when they have like a close up, I think of Bert or somebody, it says Mountain Dew.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Good call.
Ted, I don't know if he said it. I keep coming in and out, but Ted, when he's talking to Pete in the delivery room, which I do also want to make sure we talk about, he brings up Mountain Dew as a Pete account.
Yes, he does, doesn't he? Well, that is strange because that was Ken, if I'm remembering right, because he brings it up at the dinner when he and Pete reconcile.
But I think that's actually really important that it isn't a Pete account, and Ted brings it up as a Pete account, though. Again, I'm not trying to jump ahead to talk about it, but I think just Ted does a horrible job in this pitch.
I actually think Ted does a decent job. I think that he is a bit conniving here, where he's mixing in the personal quite a bit. He's invoking Pete's father. He's showing up at the birth, giving a gift. He has kind of like he's not that different from Don in a way in terms of how he's blurring the lines. But I do think his pitch in general, I think it's easy to say that it's not good because Pete doesn't really react to it. But I think that has more to do with Ted being over-prepared. I think, Weiner kind of mentions this. He's like, it's clear to him that when they were writing this, that when Aaron Levy was trying to say that like Ted had like a note card of things to remember about Pete. And he was so over-prepared, he didn't really think through certain things. Like, of course, Pete doesn't drive. He's a New Yorker, right? It's like he knew all this stuff, but he didn't realize that. Like, how well does he really know Pete in terms of like what kind of person he is? And I think that's the thing is like Pete's such an enigma, right? And I think that in this business, he really stands out in terms of like he's not a typical account man. And it's kind of his charm, I think, within the context of the show. It's like what kind of makes him work in this job so well is that he is extremely insightful, like just very, very, like he really kind of is able to like peer inside the layers of certain people and exploit that. And of course, his main disadvantage is that he has the temperament of a child, but he can turn it on and off in a weird way too. And I think Ted just doesn't get that. And that's why like he's not able to really like land any hits as it happens. But, and also, I mean, Pete's a partner. Right. I feel like it's similar to Don. Like he doesn't want to leave the front. Like this would be a totally different story if it was the Sterling Cooper of a year before all this. Right. I think so.
I think a couple things here. I think Pete is good at his job. Pete's an account man, and there's nothing worse to Pete than someone doing a bad like account pitch. Like, and you're totally right. He doesn't know Pete. Pete's mindset already is like, oh, they want to hobble Don more than they want me. And so then when he goes on and he doesn't even list all the right accounts, he brings up the driving thing, which I think is huge. I think that's like the final nail in the coffin. And the fact that he honestly brings up Don. when he's going like through it. Like, oh, I'm not Don. Like, Don doesn't have to be involved in any of this. Like, think in the initial pitch. So yeah, I just think was the exact wrong thing to do for if you actually did want Pete Campbell to come on board.
I think it's ironic too, because I think Ted genuinely would want Pete because Pete looks like really good. But I think, of course, he has the double intention too of like sticking it to Don. I think it's both at the same time. But like, of course, Pete is going to take the most personal, point of that. I really love the way Peggy does this pitch. It's so good. And I think that she's getting so close to pitching as well as Don. Weiner even kind of makes this same kind of declaration. I don't know. I think Erin Levy said it where she was like, this is like really close to how good Carousel is from the first season. But of course they have to add in the lipstick thing to kind of bring her down to earth a little bit. And it's just a kind of, I like the way they handle it. They play it for laughs a little, and I don't like one thing that Weiner says where he says that Stan gets his revenge because Peggy rejected him. Weiner says some stuff. He says some weird stuff in this episode because he talks about the whole thing where like Stan kind of misinterprets like what Peggy's, giving off and then tries to hit on her. And Weiner kind of downplays it as like, it's just a pass. It's just a pass. He's like, it's a little complicated because they work together. I'm like, dude, like what Stan did is like totally fucked up. And like and Weiner does not take it seriously. So when you kind of look in light of some of the issues Weiner's kind of run into in terms of like sexual harassment and stuff, it's like, yeah, you can hear it in these commentaries. Like he just doesn't get it. Like I get that this is 2010, but still, or 2011, no, I think when they recorded this.
I mean, not to presume, but I imagine that when that news came out about Matthew Weiner, it probably took you back and it was unfortunate. But I have to say, I mean, every time you bring up the commentaries, or not every time, but I feel like every other time, you're like, yeah, Matthew Weiner said this weird thing. It just comes like more and more glaringly apparent that like, yeah, I mean, the particulars of that whole thing, I don't exactly know. And it does, no matter what, it's unfortunate, but it does also sound like, yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant writer, but also like, man, just has some issues with boundaries and awareness and social standards that I hope he's gone to therapy. That's all I can really say at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. But yeah, do you guys agree about Peggy's pitch though? Kind of glossed over that, but I don't know if that was just me. I thought that was she just did a great job because the pressure was on. She had to do it. She couldn't rely on Don for it. Don makes a good point that it comes off as desperate if he suddenly does it. Mm-hmm. And I think that she steps up and I think she proves that this stuff, it doesn't have to be her whole life. Like she can use her life in her work, but not at the expense of it. Yeah.
It also doesn't feel like something that's like, sorry, Will.
Oh no, I was just going to say, with the exception of the unfortunate business with Stan, I mean, Peggy is in the most ideal place in this episode. She's having sex, she's having fun, and she's doing great work and not letting the stress get to her. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like the whole business with Stan really kind of puts a sour mood, unfortunately, towards the end here for her whole story. But nevertheless, she's in a generally ideal situation otherwise.
Mm-hmm. What were you going to say, Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to say, especially like in the midst of everything else of like the company crumbling, like Peggy just kind of nailing something and like also not being that stressed about it in terms of like, this is needed or else everything's going to fail. It's just like, she just wants to succeed is like the main pain point, I think, in her stress. And so, yeah, I think she's just a guiding light and she's great.
There was a debate in the commentaries around if this was her first orgasm, like through sex, not through, because I mean, obviously the Rejuvenator took care of that. But Weiner asked Levy about this and he's kind of like, what do you think? And she's like, it might have been it might have been with Pete, like that second time they had sex in season 1, where she and him do it on the couch. And I always assumed like, maybe, I don't know about that. Cause like, I don't know about that, but I've always just assumed, and maybe you guys are going to hate me for this, I think Duck kind of got in there. Like, I think her sexual awakening in terms of like having good sex for the first time, I think it was with Duck. Like in terms of like, they compartmentalize it, or they kind of like brush it with like with Abe, it's like less complicated. Like it's not like the stigma of it compared to like the imbalance of power and stuff with Duck and all that weird stuff. But I just always assumed they had pretty good sex, even though because it's Duck. I mean, he killed like 17 men in Okinawa or whatever.
Sure, I would have to assume that Duck is maybe the only guy that potentially went down on her. So if that sense,
without question.
Yeah, so in that sense, probably he's the first guy that gave her an orgasm, I would have to assume. But yeah, I don't know for sure. I was just taken aback that, as we were talking about before, that I know it's not quite as inappropriate because it's a creative realm and I'm sure it lends to the character, but Matthew Weiner, the creator of the show, asking one of his female writers about a woman having an orgasm seems like yet another red flag, I have to admit.
Will, where you're just like, you know what I was saying before about boundaries? Yeah, very fair. There was another thing that kind of...
Sorry, I was going to say that's a trick question.
Yeah.
Just because we all know girls can't orgasm from sex. It's just true. Like every girl I've ever been with has told me that. So it's like, they can't, it's not possible.
It is, okay. It is possible. It's just most women. I can't even say most women, but I've like legit studied this and read this, and like there are some women who can orgasm from penetrative sex. Like it is a thing. But I'm just saying that it is a thing, but it's not very common at all.
I was making it.
Oh, I thought you were being serious. I was like, all right, Mike, let me sit you down. I didn't know you were
like that was like I'm not good at sex joke. That
yeah, no, I knew Mike was joking, but yeah, I when John was starting to speak earnestly, I was like, oh no.
I thought you were being for real, because I've legit heard this from not dudes really, but like I've heard this from like women essentially who have said like, you know, it's never happened for me, like in terms of penetrative sex, like never been able to orgasm from it, and so like very, very uncommon. But it you know it's about the G spot.
True.
And that said, that's why I believe Duck could have done it. I think if anyone knows how to find the G spot, I mean, unfortunately, it's him. But anyway, running away from this.
Can we please change the subject?
Or we could talk about it for a few more minutes.
When was your first orgasm?
Right before we started this recording. Yeah.
First time I had a Mountain Dew.
Oh boy,
it's good. Yeah.
Wait until you have a Baja Blast.
Wait till you have a Diet Mountain Dew.
Mike's gonna have a Baja Blast and just repaint his garage.
Jesus Christ! Oh my God!
Speaking of orgasms, though, you know, Roger doesn't have one when he goes to see Joan, and we kind of get this like what feels like closure in terms of her basically finally being like, it's not going to happen. And there's a lot to this scene. It's a very sad scene, but in terms of the boundaries, there's another thing that Weiner brings up with Levy that was interesting. So he kind of mentions like that whole point where Roger says like, so that was the last time. And he's like, I wish I had known that. And according to Weiner, apparently he thinks, based on like how they talked about this, that like a lot of like the women in the like who work on the show didn't really get this, but the men did, in terms of like, you know, that mentality, right? So what do you guys think about that? Like that whole idea of like that's what would be on the guy's mind, like that was the last time, I wish I knew that.
I thought that it was a line to try to like guilt her into one more time that I frankly thought would work, and was surprised when it didn't.
I mean, on his hat. Do you think she was going to like rush after him? If that was through his mind?
Like, I think it's like, fine, one more time then. If you want to last,
like he's pouting
the last time. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think he thinks that would work.
Yeah, I mean, for as much of a sad sack as Roger has been in this episode, he does feel, I don't know, not that he was really prepared, but I think he can, in a similar kind of Don sort of way, like perform when the moment calls. Obviously, we saw that with the fake phone call and like how he went to that hotel room instead of traveling to whatever it was, New Hampshire, wherever he was supposed to go. Like I think you can kind of go through the steps when the moment calls for, and certainly when it comes to maybe getting a little nookie, I think he He knows how to kind of, grease the wheel a little bit if he wants to. But I don't think that's exclusively what's going on here. I don't want to be cynical and assume that Roger's only in it to try to get sex again. I think it's been pretty clear at this point that Roger, he's, if maybe not the only woman, certainly the woman he's had most longing and affection for is Joan. I think he does feel like they're the most compatible for each other, and that, I think he's always had this sort of absent-minded hope that things could kind of work out in some way or some form. And Joan is a lot more pragmatic, and I think she's certainly this season been a lot more clear-eyed about, like, okay, this is a fling, it can be fun, but we're both married, we're both coworkers, like, this is something that's never really going to be more than kind of a lighthearted affair. And I think it's to Joan's credit that, with the exception of Peggy, she's the one person here who I think is a lot more focused and mentally stable about this whole thing. Like, she's actually doing the work. She's not kind of falling for Roger's advances and self-pitying and all this stuff. Like, I think she's doing the necessary legwork, and she knows that, if she doesn't really kind of nip this in the bud, that Roger is just going to kind of repeat this cycle of bad behavior that I think is honestly kind of beneath him to a certain extent. And so I think there is a sort of playing and sort of like acting there, but I think there is also some sense of sincerity where, like, I think Roger is someone who is maybe not a romantic, but someone who is idealistic in some respect. And I think this was kind of like one of those, like, I lost my main account, I didn't do the one thing I'm supposed to do, and I'm kind of losing maybe one of the big loves of my life. And I think it's all kind of coming together for him in a way that's tragic, but I think overdue in some respects.
Yeah, I think he's a hopeless romantic, I would say, and I think that he just continuously makes terrible decisions when it comes to love, right? I think that he made huge mistakes with Mona. He made a huge mistake with Joan. He made a huge mistake with Jane. He made a huge mistake with the dog food lady, He was so enraptured with what was going on with Jane, and now at this point, I mean, he's just like, she's just being kind of like normal and chill and being like, oh, honey, your book. And he just can't quite, he's not like feeling that love, because I think that it's his own failing. He just can't quite connect, his wants and desires with putting other people first. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And speaking of which, I mean, when we kind of have the coming together of all this with Faye, they have the big fight, and to Don, Levy and Weiner agree that, like, to him, like, this relationship is over. Like, they haven't officially broken up, but he feels like that it's over. So when he goes to the office, and it's the end of the day, and he sees Megan, and we get a little bit more Megan. Dawn gets a bit more Megan in this episode, and she shows a little bit of interest. Oh. She's like, oh, I want to do what you do, what Miss Olsen does. And, and she does, what Miss Olsen does earlier in this episode, that's for sure. Then, of course, Dawn kind of gets to know her a little bit. And I really like how this conversation goes, just in terms of, like, there's this moment where Megan's like, you're in my head all day. I know everything about you. You don't know anything about me. That's something based on, like, a literal, like, a real thing that Weiner had heard before from somebody he knows. But yeah, we find out some things about her. She's French, I'm sure Will Ashton, that must have, raised your eyebrows. I know you're a big fan of Canada.
Oh, ho, ho.
Yeah, she's she's from Montreal, so she's French Canadian. There it is. I should be more specific. Yeah, and so they kind of have this, like, a little bit of, like, a connection thing. It starts to get a little cozy. She touches his arm. They start to make out. Don resists. He's a little bit like, I can't make any mistakes right now. But I mean, come on. His face is saying, like, I've got to make this mistake. Don't worry. And she invokes Allison. She's kind of like, I'm not like that lady. Like, who, took this too seriously, got all sentimental. No. And then they have sex. Will Ashton, were you upset?
I mean, I have to say that I feel like I saw this coming. Not only with last
you saw them coming.
Episode.
No, they cut that out of the episode to keep this, PG-13.
Right. No, I have to say though, I saw this being a possibility. I guess if you want to grade my wording a little bit, but yeah, I think the last episode really laid it on thick. at the end that like Dawn's going to see something a little bit more in Megan than, another secretary and a replacement for what's her name? That character. I can never remember her name, but
Miss
she died. Yeah, Miss Blankenship. Yes.
She was an astronaut, you bitch.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Can you imagine?
Sorry for screaming at you.
Can you imagine if they had an affair? That would have
been. She was a Hellcat, right?
Right. And then Bert's like, "Can I get in this?" And it's like, "Not unless you get testicles."
I need a drink.
Oh man, we're getting a little randy on this one, I have to admit. But in any case, yeah, no, I think it was pretty apparent that something was going to happen. But it also just seems to kind of lead into, I mean, not only with that, but also the way that Megan handled Sally and was like kind of like the mother figure. It's been pretty apparent that like Don, I think he's incapable at this point of separating his work and home life, especially since the divorce. And I think having someone who can be kind of motherly and wifely and someone who can like actually care for him outside of just being a good secretary is going to instantly appeal to him. And it doesn't surprise me that they got their rocks off in this episode.
Does it surprise you, Mike?
No, I think Megan's a modern woman. She leads the encounter. I think she knows what she's getting herself into. It's like probably the most consensual actual affair that Don's ever, if you even want to call it. But it's definitely
she leans in for the kiss. Minor points that out, and he's like, they specifically wanted to make it look like she initiates.
Yeah, I think she takes her duties as a secretary so importantly that she's like, I know how to de-stressify this man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's like, this is how he's going to come up with some ideas. And then so Don goes back to his apartment. Faye is outside of it, and it's clear from the way the scene is composed that like it looks like she's writing him a letter, like maybe to break up with him, but no, instead she tells him that she got him a meeting with Heinz, vinegar, sauces, and beans. And I mean, just first of all, the acting from Ham here, he looks so guilty about this, and it's so clear that he's like, oh shoot, I messed up. And the point where like they kiss and stuff, I'm thinking like, even after like seeing this over and over again, I'm like, is she gonna smell Megan? They work together. Like she might, who knows? Maybe they've kissed before. I don't. And it's a very sad little moment there. But yeah, Cara Buono, who plays Faye, she received an Emmy nomination for her performance in this episode. And I think she's fantastic. I mean, the way that she lashes out at Don, but then this scene with her here where she's like, whatever, like you're my life right now, and I'm just like, damn it, like she deserves better. I mean, yeah, it makes me upset and not too happy, especially with Don. Oh, wait, Will's nodding his head like, well, actually, or no, he's shaking his head like, actually, yeah. I think that they're perfect together.
No, I was going to say it's all fun and games till someone gets hurt. And unfortunately, Faye gets hurt in this one. But not before setting things up with Heinz. So, she pulled a solid for Dawn, I guess.
They have a chance. But yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle. With Lucky Strike was a huge account for them. And there's gonna be some hurting coming soon. Anything else though before we call it? This was a fun conversation and got a little weird, sure, but was there anything else we might have missed?
Well, I have a couple of things I want to add real quick.
Okay.
One, we didn't bring him up this episode, so I didn't really have a segue to mention this, but Jared Harris, Elaine Pryce.
Yeah.
I watched our theater. We did a Frank Capra series, and one of the films we showed was Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, which I got to watch for the first time, and lovely film. Not my favorite Capra, but a very lovely film all the same. And so I rewatched the Adam Sandler Mr. Deeds last night.
As you do.
Yeah, sure. And it's more similar to a Frank Capra film than you might expect from a 2000s Adam Sandler movie. But the reason I bring this up is because guess who was in the cast for that movie?
Mr. Deeds?
Sure. And also Jared Harris. Jared Harris is in the film.
Harris.
As I don't know if you guys have you guys seen Mr. Deeds?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
I assumed. I didn't
want
to
millennials. What do you?
Sure, yeah. But he's the
great Tom Petty usage in that movie.
Oh, sure, yeah. But he's the scuzzy British reporter that Winona Ryder works for.
Right. Yeah. He's like, where the hell is Babe?
Right. Yeah. So I just realized that was the first time I probably ever saw him in anything was Mr. Deeds. So I thought that was really cool.
I think the first time I ever saw him and I was kind of like, oh, this guy is good at acting and I like him was French.
Sure. You're like, he is British. And I like that.
British and he might be a little bit nasty.
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to say, tying back to our conversation at the beginning of the episode, I did a quick search on Amazon, and when you know it, Sterling Gold is something you can purchase.
Okay, well, it looks like you have an Amazon purchase to make, but while you take care of that, thank you for listening to Mad Men Men. It's been fun as always. We'll be back next week to talk about the next episode. This is season 4, episode 12, and that one is Blowing Smoke. So this will be the penultimate episode of season 4. But yeah, we'll be back for that. And until then, don't forget to let us know if you like us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can comment on the show on Spotify, or you can review and rate us on Apple Podcasts. And if you have a request or anything you want to hit us up about, we also have a Discord. You can go in and you can find the Mad Men. It's the In Between Drafts Discord channel, and you can join the Mad Men Men pod, or you don't have to join it. You can just show up and let us know what you think of the show. But yeah, we'll see y'all later.
I don't know about you guys, but I had a Baja blast.